Um, yeah, and so like the Mongols in China, the Mongols were going to kill all the Chinese. At one point, they thought, you know what? There's too many people here. Let's kill all the people so there's more room for our horses. At one point, the Mongols said that. Yeah, there's too many people. We need to like reduce the Chinese population. But the Chinese decided to show them their palaces, their food, decided to give them concubines, decided to give them like nice clothes, and like built them palaces to live in. And as eventually the Chinese convinced the Mongols, you know what? If you kill all the Chinese people, you lose all this fancy food and fancy palaces. Like, do you want these palaces? If you want the palaces, you have to keep us alive, so we can build the palaces for you. That's what the Chinese offered. And the Mongols at some point said, oh, you know what? Fine. You have nice things. In order to continue having nice things, we will not kill all of you. And so the Mongols eventually became the Yuan dynasty, right? Yes, they conquered China, but they incorporated themselves into China. They became one of our imperial dynasties. And you know, the Japanese, that's what they thought they were going to do as well. The Japanese weren't stupid. They knew their history. They knew that at one point the Mongols ruled China, and then at another point the Manchus, the Qing dynasty, were also not Han Chinese. The Manchus also ruled China. So Japan at that point in time, they knew they were strong. They knew China was weak. They knew they had an opportunity to do the same thing the Mongols did and the Manchus did, is to establish themselves as the emperors of China and become the next Chinese dynasty. They thought they would do that, but they messed it up, right? In Nanking, they lost control. There was a massacre, and after Nanking, nobody had any interest in having Japanese as emperors because they didn't have the discipline to not massacre people. And this is what I was trying to get to before. The lack of experience the Japanese had with conquering other people. Like, it was the first time they tried to conquer other people, and they did it wrong because they didn't have that experience. And as I said, China had experience. China had conquered other people. China had been conquered by other people. Like, China has experienced both sides of that coin. And so China knew like how to do it. The Japanese didn't. There were other things too. The Japanese were overly ambitious. Before the Nanking Massacre, the military was doing worse than they expected, right? The resistance by the Chinese were more fierce than they expected. They lost more people, more time, and the soldiers were really overextended. And so when they went into Nanking, they were, how should I say this? They were broken, like they were psychologically broken by that point. They didn't get enough rest, and they saw too much action. So they just went berserk. Again, that's lack of experience. Lack of experience with war, with the kind of things that happen in war. Being overconfident and not realizing that you're not invincible. I mean, there's the whole racial superiority thing, which didn't help, right? They thought they were just better than Chinese people because of that ideology. But you know, when I say this stuff to Chinese people, a lot of them don't want to hear it. Because like you said, however, a lot of people just want to talk about good guys and bad guys. They were bad guys, we were good guys. And when I talk about how, no, actually what the Japanese did, it was a human error. They made a mistake. People don't want to hear that. Like when I say, it happened because they didn't understand what war is like and how the war would affect them. And that worries me, you know, because if you want to stop atrocities from happening, you need to understand why they happen. You know, atrocities don't happen because they're evil. That's not. Like, people don't wake up in the morning and decide, you know what, I'm evil. Let's commit atrocities. That's not how that works. Everybody thinks they're doing the right thing. And sometimes they're wrong. And it's dangerous, right? Because if people don't understand, then they don't know how to avoid it. And if they don't know how to avoid it, then they end up doing it. I don't know if I'll get in trouble if I talk about current events that are ongoing. But if we look at a certain part of the Middle East today, I would also say that they made a terrible mistake. They didn't understand. Harvest says agreed, mistakes were made, as they say. Right? And we can already see it starting to happen. In hindsight, when they look back, they're gonna realize they made a mistake. They made like a lot of mistakes. I did this kind of wrong. Okay, this is good enough. Harvest says, but as usual, too many go full they're evil or it's justified. Yeah, like way too simplistic. And I just really worry. If people don't learn from the mistakes, then they just keep repeating them. And going back to like what the Mongols did, what happened in Nanking. What happened in Nanking is that killing a lot of civilians does not win you the war. I wish people learned this lesson, but they don't apparently. It turns out massacring the civilian population does not win the war. The Japanese army massacred the civilians, and then they lost the war because of it. Because they massacred the civilians, the rest of the Chinese refused to surrender under any circumstances. And that's why Japan lost the war. Japan could not convince the Chinese to stop fighting them because of what they did in Nanking. And that's why they lost. Like, if the Japanese could convince the Chinese that, yeah, you know what, having a Japanese emperor is not so bad. We'll treat you nice. You can continue living the way you want. and will do a good job governing your country. If they could convince the Chinese people of that, they had a chance that they could become Chinese emperors. They had a chance of actually conquering China. If they could convince the people that having a Japanese emperor would be okay. But they didn't do that. They convinced the Chinese people that the Japanese were unacceptable. And that's why they lost the war. Howard says you think the Japanese would have stopped fighting the US if China had capitulated early. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. Like, if China had capitulated, and if that had worked out, maybe Japan would have decided that they were strong enough that they didn't need to secure, because they attacked Japan attacked the United States because they knew that they were not strong enough if they let the Americans go, right? Is that how that worked? Is that how that went? Like, the United States could defeat Japan, and that's why Japan had to defeat the United States. How is this? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure either. Who knows, right? Who knows what they were thinking? Oops, don't have space for that. Let me chuck this down there. Because if Japan had China, and the United States could not defeat China because, you know, you had to occupy a lot of territory, a lot of land, then maybe Japan would have figured, well, we just move to China and we will stay alive that way. We don't have to cripple the United States Navy. Whereas because Japan did not control China, they were very vulnerable to a naval attack by the United States. They were always going to be vulnerable to the United States because Japan is an island, a series of islands, and so they're completely vulnerable to a strong navy. Yeah, but it's all what ifs. Who knows what would have happened? But not to completely absolve the Japanese leaders at the time for their mistakes. They did overestimate their own abilities. They were unrealistic. Like they couldn't defeat the United States. They couldn't even defeat China. They went into a war that they really could not win. Overly optimistic. And today, the troubling part is that I don't think either the Chinese or the Japanese people are addressing this in a constructive way. And I don't know, maybe I should talk to someone. Who do I call, Harvard? Who do I call to get things... one of the big contentions today is that the Japanese and the Chinese have a different version of what happened, right? They tell different histories about what happened. Harvard says, I think it's still too recent. Need a generation or two removed to start looking at it objectively. I don't know. I think we should start soon. I think there's also a danger of letting it fester. Like just, not dealing with it might not. I don't know. Like the story that the Japanese tell and the story that the Chinese tell are not the same. And both versions are self-serving to some extent, which is concerning. How is this? I mean, you still have people who were alive and went through that, and who are not interested in changing their view of things. Yeah, people, right? Anyway, if anybody is listening, what I think needs to happen is that Japanese historians and Chinese historians have to come together and gather all the evidence that they can get their hands on, actual evidence. And then they, like a group of experts, need to sit in a room, review all the evidence, and then come up with a shared version of history that they can both agree on, that both sides will agree on. That's the first thing that needs to happen. Is that the Chinese need to see the Japanese point of view, and the Japanese need to see the Chinese point of view. And not just opinions, but actually try to find historical evidence for everything that happened. I guess like a truth and reconciliation process, I guess is what I'm saying. Fact-finding. And that's the other thing I was disagreeing with you about people needing time, is if you leave it for too long, that evidence might be lost in time. That's what I'm worried about too. I think the truth will be liberating. Harvard says, yeah, exactly what I was thinking. We have that here in Canada, truth and reconciliation, I mean. Yeah. I really think it would help. And one of the next thing, one of the things that a lot of Chinese people and even a lot of Southeast Asian people and Koreans and everybody else the Japanese tried to conquer, like everybody keeps saying that the Japanese have not apologized. And the Japanese have kind of apologized. They always say, oh, we were wrong and we shouldn't have done that, and they always say that. But then people are like, well, it's not a real apology. The thing is, I think the apology can only come after a truth and reconciliation process. Because what the hell are they even apologizing for? They don't know. Like imagine like if you believe one thing, you have your one version of events, and the other person has a different version of events. They're apologizing for their version because they don't know what your version is, right? They don't even know what your problem is. So how can they apologize, right? In order for them to apologize to you in a way that is satisfactory to you, they have to see your version of what happened. Then they can apologize. And so a proper apology, I think, is something that has to be negotiated between Japan and between all the other countries. Not just, oh, Japan should apologize, but apologize for what? Like the specific wording of the apology has to be negotiated. Howard says that, and the problem that history gets rewritten all the time. 200 years down the line, and I think we'd probably have a very different idea of World War II. Oh, that's a whole other can of worms, Harvard. You are totally right. You're totally right. I mean, I'm just hoping that we are gonna rewrite history in a way that actually helps us. Because sometimes we don't do that, right? Sometimes we rewrite history in a way that makes things worse.